They thought they could stop me by poisoning the very lake I fished from. What they didn't know is that the water they poisoned was the same water flowing into their own pipes, their own homes, their own glasses. Fishing has always been my escape. Some people find peace in the gym, others binge TV. But for me, it's always been the tug of a fish at the other end of the line and the quiet ripple of water around me. That little neighborhood lake wasn't much to look at to outsiders. No glossy brochures, no fancy lakefront property signs. But to me it was perfect. Calm, still, surrounded by whispering trees, and stocked with fish just waiting for a patient hand. The lake wasn't just some man-made pond slapped down by developers. It was older than the homes themselves. Locals used to tell me it had been there longer than anyone could remember. A natural pocket of water fed by underground springs. When the construction crews came and turned farmland into suburban plots, they simply built houses around it, calling it a community feature. But for me, it was more than that. It was tradition, history, and solitude tucked right behind my street. In the early days, nobody minded me fishing there. Neighbors would wave when they saw me heading down with my pole. Some stopped for small talk. More than once, a dad brought his kid over to watch me cast, hoping I'd reel something in so his son could see the big one. For a while, the lake pulled people together. It was the one place where titles, house sizes, and HOA rules didn't matter. Just man, water, and fish. But things changed. It started with whispers. The new board doesn't like people hanging out by the lake. Then came the rules printed in bold letters. No fishing, no swimming, no boating, basically no fun at all. The HOA said fishing was dangerous, that hooks could injure ducks, that kids could drown while following an example I was supposedly setting. I read their warnings, laughed, and tossed my line in anyway. At the end of the day, I wasn't bothering anyone. I wasn't leaving trash, breaking equipment, or trespassing. It was my backyard too, and more importantly, it was our lake, not theirs. Looking back, I should have known pushing past their rules would light a fuse. But honestly, at that time, I thought the worst they could do was mail me a passive-aggressive letter or fine me a couple bucks. If I'd known the storm they were about to unleash, I might have prepared differently. Or maybe not, because sometimes peace is worth fighting for. At first, I thought the HOA would hit me with their usual playbook. You know the drill. Letters in the mailbox, fines taped to the door, maybe even a threatening voicemail from some board member who took their power a little too seriously. And they did exactly that. One morning, I found a letter stuffed inside my doorframe. Bright red ink. Violation notice. It said, "Fishing is strictly prohibited on HOA property." They threatened me with fines, escalating penalties, and even legal action. Big words. All for a hobby older than civilization itself. I shrugged it off, tossed the letter in a drawer, grabbed my pole, and went back down to the lake. Because here's the truth. You don't stop living just because someone else doesn't like your joy. But that's when things took a turn. Within days, I noticed something strange about my peaceful lake. The water, usually clear and reflective, had turned murky. Instead of gentle ripples, an unnatural green haze spread across the surface. It wasn't algae, at least not the normal kind. It looked chemical, almost like something had been poured in. Then came the smell. First faint, like someone had left paint thinner open too long. But soon it was impossible to ignore. Every gust of wind carried that stench across the shoreline, clinging to your clothes, making you wrinkle your nose. And the fish didn't stand a chance. Within a week, clusters of them floated belly up near the shore. Big ones, little ones, it didn't matter. A few turtles surfaced, lifeless. Even the ducks avoided the water. My fishing spot, the heart of my peace, was dying right in front of me. At first I thought maybe it was natural, some freak ecological shift. But then a neighbor whispered to me, the HOA hired a lake treatment service. Said it was for algae control. Algae control, huh? That was their excuse. But I knew better. This was no standard treatment. This was a chemical cocktail strong enough to kill life itself. Why? Because if there were no fish in the lake, then there would be no fishing. And if there was no fishing, there would be no problem. In their minds, they had won. They thought they'd ended the battle by wiping out the fish. But here's the truth about battles. When you escalate them, you often unleash consequences you don't understand. And oh, they had no idea what storm they had just unleashed. At first, I thought I was the only one losing sleep over the poisoned lake. After all, I was the one who fished there, the one who cared enough to notice every shift in the water's clarity. Maybe this was just my problem. Maybe I was the troublemaker the HOA always painted me as. But then, something strange started happening. Neighbors began whispering about their tap water. A mother down the street said her daughter had been complaining of stomach aches, mysteriously starting the same week the lake was treated. Another family noticed their dog wouldn't drink from its bowl anymore, unless they filled it with bottled water. At first, people brushed it off. Bad pipes, maybe something in the city lines. But as story after story piled up, so did suspicion. That's when I realized something chilling. The lake wasn't just a decoration. It wasn't just scenery for real estate brochures. It was functional, it was part of the actual water system feeding the neighborhood. The HOA, in their genius attempt to stop one guy from fishing, had effectively poisoned the entire community's water source. The puzzle pieces clicked together in the most horrifying way. The funky odor in people's showers. The weird metal-like taste lingering on their tongues after a glass of tap water. The sudden rise of mystery illnesses in kids and pets. It all led back to the same source, the lake. And do you know who figured it out? Not a plumber. Not the county. A neighbor. An old, retired civil engineer. Stood up at one of the HOA meetings, slapped his notes on the table, and spelled it out for everyone in the room. Calm, flat voice, like dropping a bomb without emotion. That lake is tied into the runoff system and groundwater recharge. By overloading it with chemicals, you've essentially contaminated your own community's supply. You could feel the air leave the room. The very people who thought they were punishing me now realized they had hit themselves. Their kids, their pets, themselves. Some people stared in disbelief. Others whispered in panic. The same HOA board members who signed the check for the chemical treatment tried to stay poker-faced, but the sweat on their foreheads told the truth. And inside me, a mix of anger, vindication, and honestly horror. This wasn't about fishing anymore. This was survival. The truth had finally spilled into the open, and suddenly my little feud with the HOA wasn't just late-night whispers or passive-aggressive notices stuffed in mailboxes. It was headline material. The board tried to push back at first. Classic damage control. The HOA president cleared his throat, wearing that fake politician smile, and said the chemicals were harmless in small quantities. Another board member leaned over the microphone and called it a routine algae management program. But everyone in the room had seen the fish floating belly up. Everyone had smelt the chemical tang when their faucets ran. Everyone had watched their kids and pets get queasy. There was no spinning this. You can't PR campaign your way out of poison water. The pressure built quickly. County officials were called. Health inspectors came out with their white trucks, parked at odd angles on our streets, and marched down toward the dead lake. They took water samples, snapped photographs of the shoreline, and shook their heads with every new thing they saw. And then came the reporters. Oh, the reporters. Local news vans parked right in front of the HOA president's pristine lawn. Blinding camera lights lit up the evening as neighbors one by one gave their stories, their anger dripping through every word. Mothers talked about sick kids. Veterans shook their heads and asked how a group meant to protect property values could possibly poison property itself. But here's the wildest part. The very people who approved the chemical dump, those same pompous board members, lived in the neighborhood too. They drank the same water, cooked with it, bathed in it. In trying to punish me, they had essentially poisoned their own families. That irony wasn't lost on anyone. It became the rallying cry of the neighborhood. People were furious, not just because they'd been endangered, but because the danger was born out of something so petty. A fishing rod. A man sitting quietly by the water. And in that moment, the balance shifted. For the first time, it wasn't me against the HOA. It wasn't one stubborn fisherman against a faceless board. It was the entire community uniting against the arrogance of a few. The power they once held was crumbling right before their eyes. And now the fish I used to catch weren't the only ones on the hook. Middle hook punch. That's when everyone realized. The HOA hadn't poisoned my hobby. They had poisoned themselves. The chaos that followed was unlike anything our neighborhood had ever seen. The HOA board, once so smug and untouchable, was suddenly cornered like rats in the daylight. They couldn't dodge the headlines, they couldn't hide from the inspector's reports, and they certainly couldn't look their neighbors in the eye at the mailbox anymore. The president of the HOA, the same man who banged his gavel the day he announced no fishing allowed, abruptly resigned, citing, get this, personal stress. Some of the other members claimed ignorance, saying they didn't know the chemicals would spread that far. But the paperwork they signed told another story, and the community wasn't buying their excuses. Lawsuits started circling like vultures. Families demanded compensation for medical bills, damaged property, and months of clean water that now had to be hauled in by the case. It cost a fortune to even begin detoxifying the lake. Special crews came with machines, filters, and treatments, and even then, no one could guarantee how long it would take before it was safe again. And the neighborhood? Oh, it changed forever. The lake became more than just water and fish, it became a symbol. People walked by it differently. Some looked sad, some looked angry, but none of them looked past it anymore. It wasn't background scenery anymore. It was proof of how reckless people in power could be. As for me, I still walked down there. My fishing rod stayed leaned in the shed, but I went just to stand by what used to be my quiet escape. I watched the surface slowly try to heal each week, like a wound stubbornly scabbing over. And I reminded myself, they hadn't taken the lake from me. They had exposed themselves. The irony? My stubborn fight to keep fishing had turned into something bigger than just me. It became the story of how one person refusing to bow down revealed injustice and woke up an entire community. And here's the lesson I carry, and that I want every single person watching this right now to remember. Sometimes the battles we fight for peace turn out to be battles for truth. And truth has a funny way of boomeranging back at those who try to bury it. Because in the end, the HOA didn't poison me. They poisoned themselves. And that, my friends, is how one fishing trip unraveled an entire HOA. If you enjoyed this story and want more real-life tales just as wild, don't let the algorithm poison your feed. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you're always here when the next story drops. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and never stop fishing for the truth.